Are you tired of advertisements? You can listen to this episode and more ad-free for only $1 a month by supporting the show on Patreon. Visit monstersamonguspodcast.com and hit the Patreon tab for more details. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Can you feel that breeze? Can you hear those crickets? Summer is right around the corner. A season for parties by the bonfire, vacations to distant, far-off lands, and visits to our nation's national parks. And of course, just hanging out on those warm summer evenings when the sky looks so big and bright, you could almost reach out and touch it. But as fun as all those summer memories are, it's important to keep in mind that monsters can lurk there as well, as you will soon learn here this evening. So sit back, crack open a cold one, and turn the volume up a notch or two. I've got some stories to share, beginning with a visit to one of our amazing national parks. Garrett, welcome to the program.
Hey Derek, this is Garrett. I'm calling from South Carolina, but my story actually takes place in northwest Montana, in Glacier National Park. My wife and I recently took a honeymoon out there. We were out there for, I think it was 7 nights. And one of the nights, there was what's called a star party up at kind of the highest point in the park. A bunch of astronomers bring all their telescopes out, and you look at the stars all night. Goal being to see all the different galaxies, being out in the middle of nowhere, you can hopefully see the Milky Way and everything else, and apparently it's a really cool experience. We got up there, and we were sacked in with fog that night, so there really wasn't a star party. They just kind of told us about it. But so on the drive down, we're leaving Logan's Pass, this, like I said, the highest point in the park, and we're driving down, winding our way through the road there in the park, and we eventually come to this hairpin turn. And we noticed that kind of once we got out of the peak area of the mountain, well, not really the peak, but out of the pass there, the fog had lifted and we were able to see the sky. So we got to this hairpin turn and we said, all right, let's look at some stars here. Sure, there'll be some headlights, but whatever, we can deal with that. So my wife and I, we get out of the car, and there's a little parking lot there. We get out of the car. There's a few other people from the star party who had also decided to stop there. And we're just looking around and everything. It's just cool looking at stars. As we are sitting there looking at stars, we see it looked larger than a satellite, or at least brighter than a satellite, I guess, would be a better way of saying it. And it was moving across the sky. And I said, oh, look, there's a satellite. That's pretty cool. And I have seen Starlink satellites launch and how eventually they go kind of into the shadow, I guess, of the Earth, or for some reason they stop reflecting the sun's light as they are traveling through the atmosphere. Well, I guess out of the atmosphere, whatever. But so this one eventually did that. But the difference was this satellite specifically was moving east to west. I just know that because on the way to the star party, we stopped to watch the sunset at this exact turn. So we know that the way it was traveling was roughly westerly. And so logic says it should have continued to reflect sunlight until it dipped below the horizon, because that's where the sun is in the west. But whatever, chalk it up. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe that's just the way physics works or something. But then about 5 minutes later, we saw a second satellite. This one was moving across the sky, and it was like, cool, there's another one. But this one was very obviously a satellite. It wasn't reflecting anything super bright. It was just kind of a little star just moving across. And then it stopped. And then it started going backwards. And then it stopped. And then it started going forwards relative to the direction that I initially saw it moving. So the only way I could kind of describe this or chalk this up to being a plane would be if the plane were doing like loop-de-loops, basically. Because relative to us on the ground, it was slowing down and then turning around and speeding up, but all in like a linear motion. It was not no left or right movements. It was just in a straight line doing this. From everything I can tell, that's pretty typical sighting. But yeah, that was really it. Eventually couldn't get my wife to see it. She was too cold, so she went back in the truck. But the other people there tried to get them talked onto it to be able to see it. Eventually lost it the second I looked away for a second. I don't know if it disappeared or if I just lost it in the vastness of space. Probably the more reasonable thing. But that's about it. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Garrett. You know, a few months ago, Sarah and I made a visit to Death Valley National Park. And one of our activities while there was to attend one of their versions of a star party. The night of the event finally arrived. The sky was clear and crisp, and we drove a few miles from our campsite to the viewing area, only to learn that because of some mud on the trail, they canceled the entire event. Look, guys, it's a national park. I was fully expecting to encounter some mud. So unlike you, Garrett, I did not get to witness some strange aerial acrobatics. Actually, that's not true. We also experienced some odd movement high up in the sky each of the nights that we were up there. But I was quick to dismiss most of that as either satellites or high-altitude jets. Of course, nothing we saw turned on a dime or quickly reversed course, because that sort of thing typically does not happen during manned flight. We simply lack the technology. Not to mention the G-forces created by such a maneuver would crush any poor soul that's trapped inside. Now, in researching for this call, it dawned on me that I've been to several national parks, especially here on the West Coast, and I've seen some strange flying or floating objects at nearly every one of them. Once, while I was in Cuyahoga Valley National Park, I saw, in the distance, a large gray craft hovering over the coast of Lake Erie. I was pretty excited to see that at the time, but everybody else in the vehicle was quick to tell me that the Cleveland Air Show was going on that weekend, so I dismissed this as that then as well. And for you Monster Squad members, you might remember me discussing a UFO I saw while observing the sunrise in Joshua Tree National Park a few years back. A UFO I even sort of caught on video, briefly. You can actually catch that video clip in the show notes, but I will warn you it's very underwhelming. Now, that was a brief and probably explainable encounter, likely a illegal drone of some sort. But if you want to hear the backstory on that sighting, go all the way back to MAUB number 26. Now, the point here being that there seems to be a bit of a trend here, a trend that goes back to the very beginning of the UFO craze. For it was over a national park, Mount Rainier National Park to be specific, that the first contemporary UFO sighting was reported. A report that opened a can of worms. The Kenneth Arnold encounter, courtesy of the History Channel.
Kenneth Arnold was a 32-year-old successful businessman on the summer day that his sighting took place. He sold firefighting equipment and flew his own light plane. On Tuesday, June 24, 1947, Arnold was flying toward Mount Rainier above the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. The air was smooth and clear as he reached 9,200 feet and noticed a bright flash. To the left and north of Mount Rainier, he saw what he described as 9 peculiar objects flying at over 1,200 miles per hour. As they passed the mountain, the objects were outlined against the snow. They traveled in a V formation and were skipping through the sky in such a way that Arnold said they resembled a saucer skipping across water.
Now, a mere 2 weeks later, the crash in Roswell sent shockwaves throughout the nation, and the decades that followed were rife with saucer fever. And it all kicked off over another of these preserved and protected pieces of land. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe not. But I certainly thought the topic was worth a discussion. Now I have a bit more to discuss, but first I must take a break for tonight's sponsors.
He has it.
Now, as someone who cooks at home a lot, I put tons of energy into trying to figure out what to make each and every day. But when I get too busy, I have less time for creativity in the kitchen, and then I often find myself bored with the same old go-to meals. But lately, I've been trying Green Chef to change up my dining habits, and I'm really enjoying it. Green Chef has over 80 weekly menu options to suit a variety of lifestyles, including keto, plant-based, gluten-free, and more. I really like that Green Chef helps me stay on track with my healthy eating, and all the recipes feature farm-fresh, seasonal ingredients, so I never get bored or fall into a food rut. This week we had spicy sesame shrimp with broccoli, cashews, and spicy ginger lime aioli, and I will say it was tasty. And because all the ingredients are pre-measured, it makes cooking easy and no food is wasted. The unique flavor combinations make healthy eating so much more enjoyable. Now, Green Chef is offering Monsters Among Us listeners an awesome deal right now, so go to greenchef.com/monsters50 and use code MONSTERS50 to get 50% off, plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's greenchef.com/monsters50 and use code MONSTERS50 for 50% off, plus 20% off your next 2 months. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well.
Afford it? Too much hassle? Think you don't need it?
Now, Garrett, you're not the only one, pal. The following report was submitted to the National UFO Reporting Center all the way back in September of 2005. Event occurred August 31st, 2005, 10 p.m. local time. Location, Glacier National Park, Montana, USA. My wife and I were camping at the Many Glacier Campground in Glacier National Park and took a break from the campfire to look at the stars around 10 p.m. To the north, at what appeared to be a high altitude, we noticed a single very bright object moving from east to west at average speed. It was a steady, white, brilliant light. Then after about 30 seconds of brilliant illumination, it dimmed and changed directions to a northwest bearing. No flashing or colored lights were visible. We wouldn't have rendered the object unusual had it not changed direction so rapidly. An instantaneous sharp directional change, and the aurora borealis became visible a few moments after the object had passed out of sight. I don't know, that sounds pretty similar to me. And on a personal note, I'm hoping that we have some travel in us at some point this summer. And if we do, odds are good that we'll hit up another national park. And you can bet your backside I'll have my eyes open and glued to the skies. So thank you, Garrett, for keeping your eyes peeled as well. Now, with summer right around the corner, that means school is out for the year, which means some of you are home from college over summer break. And I've been there. Things can be a little weird going back, a little surreal. But trust me, they're nothing like what Bryce experienced on his summer break. Please welcome him from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Hey Derek, hey Sarah. I was just listening to season 14, episode 2, and a caller mentioned that she heard a pop and then her own name speak as she speaks to her cat. I was trying to come across like clues and stuff that happened to me 2 nights ago within your podcast, and that helped immensely because it was about 12 o'clock at night. I live in Williamsburg, Virginia. That's on the Capital One Trail. I've heard a call about there before, but it's like Jamestown, like colonization and stuff, so I'm sure you know what that is. But I'm just kind of dozing off in my bed and hear a loud pop in the wall behind me where my bed is, and it kind of like shoots me awake, and I was like, I could use a drink. You know, I'm a little thirsty, and I'm a milk drinker, so I decided to get some milk. I go over, I live upstairs, and I was home for college, and I lean over the railing like I do most nights. My dad stays up pretty late, and I say, Brett, that's his name, and he goes, yeah. I was like, can you get me some milk? And he didn't reply, and I was like, that's weird. And so I asked again, and he didn't say anything. So I was like, is he ignoring me? And so I went downstairs and looked around, and he was in bed, and he hadn't said yeah. And I was like, oh, that's weird, but I'll think nothing of it. And then I went upstairs, I got my milk, I was just relaxing, and I have a candle in my room that's Atlanta scented because I'm from Georgia, and it's like some homesick candle, and it just smells really good. So I light it most nights, and I got a new one not so long ago. I mean, it's a fresh candle, and I went to light it, and a flame would happen, like it would light for maybe like a second, and then the flame would just go away. And so I tried for maybe 20 minutes to get this candle to light, and then I couldn't, so I gave up, and I made sure like the flame was out and all, just in case, and I ended up going to bed. The next morning when I woke up, maybe around like 9 o'clock, because I actually left for college again the same day, when I woke up around 9, the candle that would not light the night before was bright as day, the biggest flame I've ever seen come out of that candle. And I was so confused how the candle was lit because it wouldn't light for me last night, and I know for a fact that I didn't light it because it wouldn't happen. And when I went and looked at like how much wax, like the candle wax was melted, it looked like it only been lit for like maybe a couple of hours. And it was a very strange occurrence. And my father actually had something similar happen to him about 2 weeks ago when he was riding his bike, and he hears a voice say, Brett, over here. And so he stops and looks around, and no one was there. And it kind of confused him, but we're both big supporters of your podcast, and he's the one that told me to listen to it a couple of years ago now, and he always tells me to go get some nightmare fuel when I'm on a drive. And we're big supporters of your podcast, man, and just hoping that this story helps some people. It's pretty similar to the season 14 call with the pop in the wall. And then she heard her own voice, except in this case, I heard my dad's voice. But, yeah, that's my story. Thank you guys for what you do. Love your podcast. All right, bye.
Thank you, Bryce. Now, I imagine the most unsettling part of any haunting is seeing or hearing what you believe to be a spirit, a ghost, or a former human being of some sort. I think my initial thought in a situation like that would be, is this some sort of entity, or is this a strange human in my space? But I can only assume that those feelings are amplified when whatever this thing is begins pretending to be someone else in the household. And it's made even worse when it starts calling out your name and lighting fires inside. Now, hopefully that's the extent of your experiences, Bryce, because I'd hate to see how this entity, if that's in fact what it is, would escalate this situation. But hopefully that's not something you have to deal with. But I do thank you for taking the time to call in. Now, folks, if you have a story you would like to submit, from a quiet, still place, of course, call our hotline at 888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. And don't forget to finish your call as well. Even if you've reached the 5-minute time limit, just call back and continue your story. Trust me, these stories just don't have the same oomph when they're lacking an ending. Now don't worry, I'll splice it all together just like I do with all the other entries. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm getting pretty good at it. Oh, and also 1 story per submission. I might be getting good at it, but don't make me work so hard. Now, if you're overseas and you want to submit without paying phone charges, Just record your story as a voice memo on your phone and email it to me at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. And keep those submissions short, though. Some of those emailed stories can tend to be very, very lengthy. Anyway, that's how you submit, and I sure hope that you do, because that's what keeps the show rolling. And that's how we're able to hear tales like this one from Joe over in Ohio.
Hello, my name is Joe. I'm actually from Ohio as well. I just discovered your podcast today, and I figured I might as well get a very small, minor experience of mine that I had about January 3rd of this year, actually. I'll just go ahead and jump right into it and just say this. It was early in the morning, 5 o'clock. I'm up every morning at 5 to get to work. It's blackout. I get upstairs to make myself my lunch for the day. And in the kitchen, I have this window on the side wall that faces the front lawn and the house across the street. And when I was making my lunch, I, for some reason, just kind of glanced up over my shoulder at the window. I don't know why, I just did. And I couldn't make out a form. It looked like it was glowing very dimly. I could make out some sort of jacket, maybe a collar. I couldn't really decipher if it was a man or a woman. Anyway, it looked as though it were like either jogging in place or walking towards the house across the street. And I just kind of looked at it for a solid 30 seconds, and then it just faded away and disappeared right there in front of me. It wasn't in my peripherals. I was looking dead at it. And the weirdest thing about this whole thing, every moment of every day I have thoughts firing off in my mind constantly. I can't stop thinking if I tried, but when I was looking at this thing, there was nothing going on upstairs. So I guess I was entranced or something. I really don't know what it could have been, and I could say that I wasn't fatigued or tired because I actually got a decent night's sleep the night before. I'll just go ahead and top it off by saying I'm not the only one who's seen weird things across the street, but those are stories for another time. Thank you very much for listening. I really love the podcast so far, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about it. Very nice speaking to you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Joe. Now, since Joe viewed this oddity through a window, I can't help but think it might have been some sort of weird reflection from the glass. Maybe something moving behind him like a television screen. The brighter part, the jacket in this example, being the only part you can see in the reflection. The rest washed out by a dark background. Now, that's not an easy scenario to describe, but I think you're picking up what I'm putting down. And I think that theory is entirely possible. But to play devil's advocate here, he mentioned trying to reproduce the experience many different times, and he was not able to. If it were as simple as a TV screen behind him reflecting off the glass, I can't help but think that he likely would have discovered that at some point. Whatever it was, I'm glad that he gave us an opportunity to hear about it. We certainly appreciate you calling in, Joe.
Home games.
Now, how closely do you track your bank statements and credit card history? Are you coming through every single charge on a daily basis? Or do you just assume everything is fine until you notice something strange? Now that I'm using Rocket Money, it keeps a close eye on all of my charges for me and flags things like price increases, unusual transactions, and upcoming recurring charges. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills. Budgeting has never been my strong suit, but the Rocket Money app makes keeping track of what I spend very easy. It emails me about frequent spend items, sneaky service fees, bill increases, and other things I might have missed otherwise. It also makes it easy to see what I'm spending money on, so I can reel it in if I'm going a bit too crazy on shopping or dining out that month. Now, Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money goes to work on your behalf. It's a pretty nice feature, Now, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's features. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Monsters Among Us. That's rocketmoney.com/Monsters Among Us. rocketmoney.com/Monsters Among Us.
The Angels Express.
Now it's time for yet another story. This time, please join me in welcoming Eli to tonight's program.
Hi, my name is Eli. I've been listening to your show for a long time, and I have a lot of stories, but there's one that's been bothering me since it happened a couple weeks ago. So I live in Michigan, in the Downriver area for anyone that knows it, and it's a relatively quick story, but I haven't been able to get it off my mind, and so I'm just curious if anyone else has dealt with this or if you have any thoughts on what it might be. So near my house, there's a little field, so I drive really slow by there all the time because sometimes you'll see deer in there, and at night, you usually only see their eye shine. Lately, there's been 2 or 3 of them that have been there pretty regularly, so every day I've been driving slow as I come back home from work. But one of the days when I came around the corner, because you drive down the street and you'll turn around the corner and the field is just past that corner, so you can't really see it until you're there. There was a group of kids standing there, and I didn't think anything of it because, kids are kids. But when I drove by, their eyes had eye shine like a deer would, and I know that's not a thing that people have. And they looked totally normal. They were just a group of kids in regular clothes, just kind of standing near the edge of the field. So I wouldn't have thought anything of it if their eyes all hadn't shone back at me like deer's eyes. My fiance in the car didn't see it. She was on her phone or she was resting because we were coming back from a longer drive. But it was just really odd, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. So if you have any thoughts, or if anybody else has any thoughts, let me know. I really enjoy the show, so thank you and keep it up.
Thank you, Eli, for calling in. Now, at first I thought it a little weird that the kids were all in the field at night like that. Seemed like something out of Children of the Corn. Then I remembered what my childhood was like. We would hide along the roadside all the time, trying to scare the drivers flying by. Popping out of bushes, setting up elaborate scenes. All from a safe distance, of course. And 9 times out of 10, it never worked. So what Eli saw that evening could have simply been that. Unsupervised children at play. But the glowing eyes, that's not all that normal. But it can and does happen. Google human eye shine, or take someone's photo with a flash camera. There is some eye shine, though it's not true eye shine. It's actually a reflection of the muscles in the back of the eye, filtered through the red blood vessels that permeate the eyeball. That's why with humans, the eye shine is typically red. Now, true night vision is the reflection of a layer in the eye called the tapetum lucidum, and it's a much more reflective surface, and found in most true nocturnal animals. Which makes what Eli saw extra creepy. So thank you again for sharing it with us, Eli. I'm afraid I don't have any answers, but your call left me full of questions.
Are you surprised?
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Now, I can't believe we're already halfway through the year and only about 100 days away from the spooky season. What's something you've accomplished this year that you're proud of? And what is one thing you still want to accomplish this year? Time flies, which is why it's important to take a moment to celebrate your wins and reflect on lessons you've learned along the way. Therapy can help you do that and set realistic goals for the next 6 months. I know therapy always helps ground me when I feel like life is going too fast and it feels out of control. It helps me take a little breather If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, which makes it convenient and flexible. Just fill out a quick questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist at any time for no additional charge. Take a moment, visit betterhelp.com/Monsters Among Us today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Monsters Among Us.
Of course we do.
Now maybe you have some travel plans set up for this summer. Maybe you're hopping on a plane, destined for some R&R. Well, while you're rocketing through the sky in a little silver tube, be sure to be careful who you sit by. If you don't believe me, just ask this next caller.
Hi, I wanted to share my story. So in 2023, there were 2 viral events, respectively, of a man and a woman on a plane that saw something. The woman's story went viral, and it prompted one of my best friends to call me and say, hey, you need to look at this. So this is the story of what I witnessed on a flight from San Francisco to New York in the summer of 2019. Before I tell my story, I think it's important to explain my personality. It's because of my personality why I actually didn't really freak out on the plane. It's also my face. So I'm a pretty stoic person. This is also not my first rodeo with supernatural. And also I think being a New Yorker and being desensitized to a lot of things also possibly saved me. So again, on the way back from San Francisco to New York, I was on the plane. And on the right, it's a 3-seater. And then on the left, it's also a 3-seater. So an elderly couple, they come in. And they were older. I would say the wife is about 80 and the husband probably about 85. But the wife was the more vivacious of the two. So she sits in the middle. So I'm in the window. She's in the middle. Her husband is on the left. And then adjacent to us is a woman traveling with a baby. And so we'll call the woman in the couple Sally. So Sally begins to talk to me about death. Everything was death. Death of family, death of friends, death of plants, death of friends, death of... It was just so overwhelming. And I ended up started to just like repeat biblical scripture over her. And anything she said about death, I would say, life is in the power of the tongue. Let's just keep it like that. But it didn't work. She just kept speaking about death. And so the woman adjacent to us with the baby started to cry. And I just leaned forward a little bit to watch. Like I welcomed the break from talking to Sally about death or listening to her talk about death. And so the whole time I can see from my peripheral, Sally is just looking at me. So once the woman with the baby, she gets her baby to calm down, I sit back, and when I look at Sally, I see a white, forked tongue slither back into Sally's mouth. And at the time, we were not eating, we were not drinking, and I said to myself, like, you know what, I'll just sort this out later. And so Sally began speaking again, and I said, hey, I would really like to enjoy the rest of this flight in peace. And so that's what happened. I don't know what it was. I kind of think maybe she was a reptilian or maybe it was her true form coming out. But I do thank you for this forum that allows myself and others to share our supernatural experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I don't know if I have an opinion either way on what this woman might have been. I know there are certain body modifications that can be done to make the tongue appear forked like a snake's. I know there are also certain ailments that can turn one's tongue bright white. And I've also done enough air travel to know that oftentimes your seatmate can be a downright nightmare. But I've also heard many stories about these lizard people, or the reptilians. So honestly, who really knows? But before you start thinking me mad for entertaining such notions, check out this report recently released by Harvard researchers, courtesy of KTTN, Fox News 11, out of Los Angeles.
It sounds like an old science fiction movie, but a study out of Harvard finds that aliens might be living among us. Harvard University's Human Flourishing Program speculates UFOs may be spaceships visiting alien friends planted right here on Earth, that is. Those aliens then are disguised as humans trying to fit in. Study examines 4 different alien theories, including technologically advanced ancient human civilization, plus ETs from the future. The study says aliens could either live among us, underground, or inside the moon.
Inside?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know what to do with that.
They're overlooking the oceans. I'm telling you, if these things are real, they're probably in our oceans. And look, I'd like to think that all of this stuff is true, because at the rate we're going, it wouldn't hurt to have some otherworldly guidance. But I'm not sure that there's any stock in any of this lizard man or reptilian talk. It seems a lot of it is getting debunked. Take the infamous alien freakout lady, for example, the one that our caller mentioned. Now, I recently heard an interview where she admitted that there was nothing to any of it. And if you don't believe me, here she is in her own words, via the New York Post.
Can I ask again what you saw?
Yeah. You know, the reason why I probably haven't come out yet, because it's like so cringe, I did not see anything.
What?
I mean, I think y'all knew that.
So what you're saying is that clip that we all saw, that motherfucker's not real, is not like you thinking that someone is an alien. It was just the tail end of an argument.
It was an expression of speech.
Okay.
That motherfucker back there is not real!
Now, I don't know what to believe, but I do believe that that was an amazing story, caller. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share it with us. Hey everybody, don't forget to pick up some merchandise from our online shop. Visit monstersamonguspodcast.com and click the shop tab. There you will find all sorts of designs on t-shirts, hats, bags, stickers, pins, patches, posters, and much, much more. And we just did a restock on many of the sold out sizes. So if you've been waiting, now is the opportunity to jump on these deals. Okay, next up we work our way to the Show Me State. Sophia, welcome to the program.
Hey, Derek and the Monsters Among Us crew. This is Sophia calling from Missouri. I'm calling about 2 really strange events that happened pretty close together in the early 2000s. I was in about 5th or 6th grade at the time and living on a military base in Germany. And this place definitely had an energy to it. A lot of my classmates insisted their buildings were haunted. It just definitely had this spooky kind of feeling to it. So because this was a long time ago, some of the details are not clear to me anymore, but I do know what I saw and what I felt. Those have definitely stayed with me. So the first occurrence, it is early morning, and suddenly I woke up. Like, I sat up fully awake, and I'm looking across my room, and in my window, I see a dark shape go behind my curtain. It was small, approximately triangular, and I just see the shape go behind my curtain. I had light-colored curtains, and they went to the windowsill, so they weren't long. I know it wasn't my curtain. And just instantly, in that moment, my brain said, fairy. And in that moment, I even had a notebook near my bed, and I sketched one out because I knew right then this was a moment I needed to remember. Later on, I did check, and my window was closed, so I know it wasn't a breeze, it wasn't a bird or anything crazy like that. And we were on the 3rd floor, and something about it felt special. So the second thing that happened, which I don't know which of these events came first, but I do know that they happened close together. So the second time, I had a corner shelf full of trinkets and knickknacks, and I just get this really strong urge to go look at a specific trinket. It was a souvenir my grandparents brought back from Egypt. It is a carved lotus flower in a stone. This really beautiful stone. I'm actually holding it right now. And it's in a little leather drawstring bag with a scarab beetle on it. So I just get this urge to go over and look at it. So I walk over, and the shelf is right next to my window. I pick up the bag, and I can feel that it's empty. I look all over for this thing, and I can't find it. I want to say I was home alone, but if I wasn't, I know that nobody was in my room at the time, because I remember thinking, how the heck did this thing just vanish? It drove me crazy. I looked everywhere. Eventually, I just kind of gave up. The next day, I'm looking at my shelf again, and just for kicks, I touch the bag again, and I can feel the stone is back in there. There's no reason anyone could have taken it. I really don't know how to explain it, but I can very vividly remember the sensation of touching it and it being gone, and then the next day touching it and it just being there again. I really have no explanation for it. I guess looking back, I would say fae or a trickster. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. You know, it sounds like you're talking about apportation, the unseen movement of an item or items using some sort of supernatural ability. You used to hear of that sort of thing a lot back when seances were all the rage. Typically, things like flowers or perfume would appear. Sometimes live animals, such as birds or mice. But not so much for intricately carved stones in a little leather pouch. But if Sophia's claims are to be believed, perhaps apportation occurs with those objects as well. Thank you again, Sophia, for sharing the entry. Now then, this next entry revisits the doppelganger phenomena, and does so on a very personal level. Kendra from Canada, welcome to tonight's program.
Good morning, Derek. My name is Kendra. I'm 20 years old from Parry Sound, Ontario. I'm just calling about a memory I have from, I want to say maybe I was 12 or 13. Me and my mom lived in this apartment building. Mind you, my mom, my sister, and myself have always been not really asking to see things, but very open to seeing or hearing anything paranormal. We have always had that wild side, since I do have an older brother who did pass away at birth. But this one story I remember very vividly. We were living in an apartment building which had some pretty gnarly things go on. There was a woman who lived in the apartment above us, and she ended up being burnt alive with her child in her arms. We weren't totally sure how true that was, as we couldn't really find any reports. But the apartment just below us, which was actually just below my mother's bedroom, there was a lady who, I don't want to say owned the house, but her name was on the deed as well as the owners of that time. And her night nurse ended up pulling the plug on this woman, and we kept smelling perfume and stuff all the time. And, you know, we would just say hi. She never bothered, never did nothing wrong. But the one night that I'm calling about, with me being young, my mom would just leave the bathroom door open if she was using it and just keep the light off, and us girls would go in and grab a hairbrush or whatever we needed. So I went in, and I saw what it looked like my mother was sitting on the toilet. I know, weird, but I said, "Oh, sorry, Mom." And whatever this thing was that looked like my mom looked at me but had no face. And my dogs, who I had a boxer and a German Shepherd pit bull at the time, who have both sadly passed away, but they would not go in the bathroom, which was unusual. And this thing looked at me, and my dogs ran. They ran to the kitchen. I was a little spooked, so I walked to my mom. I was calling for her, hollering for her, and she ended up being in the kitchen. And I said, "Mom, I've been calling you." She said, "Well, I didn't hear you." I said, "We need to leave." And she said, why? What's going on? I told her about this thing that I saw in the bathroom. Now, I'm not too sure, again, what it was. We kind of just left it at what it was for a while until things started going bad, but we did end up leaving, and then after that, this apartment just was really uncomfortable. We had bruises and scratches that we'd wake up with. We had, I don't know what you want to call it, almost like black clouds everywhere, and we ended up getting our apartment at the time blessed by a preacher 7 times, and it just kept making it worse. Anyways, that's my quick call-in. So I'm just ran outside on my work break and wanted to give you a call, but I'm sure I'll call in more as growing up I've always experienced things, and where I do live now I've experienced things, and yeah, love your podcast. Thanks, Derek. Bye.
Thank you, Kendra. You know, if someone pulled the plug on me, I'd probably do some haunting as well. Certainly can't blame the lady. Thank you once again, Kendra, for calling in. And I will say that's why knocking is always the best practice. Now let's revisit another summer pastime. Fireworks. Be it an organized display at your local park, or your neighbor with 3 names, popping them off one at a time in his driveway. Fireworks and summers in America go hand in hand. And sure, fireworks can be a lot of fun. But what if it's not actually fireworks that you're seeing out there on the horizon? If it's not, what else could it possibly be? And are we in any danger? Crystal from Washington State. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Derek. My name is Crystal. I'm calling from the Pacific Northwest, Olympia, Washington, to be specific. And last night, that would be April 23rd, well, the wee hours of April 23rd, 2023, I had a very strange experience. I was in bed. My son had climbed into bed next to me, and we're sleeping. And I woke up to the sound of what sounded like a gunshot or a firework going off. And, you know, I didn't think too much about it. I was just, you know, sleeping and didn't really want to disturb my son. So I stayed in bed until I heard a very odd noise out the window. Lightning was an option. I guess I thought it may have been lightning, but I kept hearing this odd noise. It was an oscillating, like, whirring sound. I looked out the window and the sky was orange. You know, it was like the movie. It looked like there was a fire in the sky. And I looked out my window. We have a heavy wooded area behind our house, and this orange glow was just coming through the woods. It was eerie. And the light and the sound were synced up in a very odd way. And after a few seconds, everything went out. All the lights went out. Even the lights in our house went out. And there was an explosion. Another, like, sounded like a gunshot. And I thought to myself, this is so strange. I went to get my husband, who was sleeping in another part of the house. If our son comes to bed with us, sometimes one of us will go to another room. He's 5, and, you know, we try to keep him. It's a normal thing for our parents to do, I think, if a kid comes to bed, where we want to do our best to make sure he stays asleep. So he was in another part of the house, and I went to get him. I woke him up and I said, you have to come see this. And we both looked out the window and saw this strange oscillating orange light with the accompanying whirring sound. And I told him, hey, just wait here. In a few seconds, everything's going to stop and you'll hear an explosion. And that's exactly what happened. I was completely freaked out. After it all stopped, I went and did a little research, and it seems like what happened was a transformer exploded. However, I heard 3 separate explosions. And, you know, I'm 99% sure that's all it was this transformer exploding. But part of me is, you know, wondering, was there more to it than that? We're very close to the JBLM, which is a Joint Base Lewis McChord military compound close to us here in Olympia. And I even started thinking, but it's some kind of weird experimental aircraft. And, obviously, as a fan of the paranormal, my mind started wandering to some other options. But I just thought that this might be useful to anyone out there who had witnessed something similar, a strange whirring light with oscillating sound and explosions. If anyone has experienced this, it may be helpful for them to know that it has a simple explanation. It's most likely just a transformer exploding. I have never experienced anything like that, and can't help but think that other people may benefit from that information. So thank you. I love the show, and I look forward to hearing more from you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Crystal. All right, let's start off on the ground here. It sounds like to me that this encounter could be easily explained, because my initial thought here is a combination of both fireworks and synchronized drones. You see, many areas are opting for these drone shows rather than the traditional firework display, to save money, to limit the impact on the environment, and of course for fire risk. So I'm wondering if, in places where this sort of thing can happen, can the two be displayed together? That could explain the bright flashes and loud explosions of the fireworks, and account for the lights and sounds that were experienced by our caller, the drones. It certainly seems to fit the description. But look, this encounter took place in Canada, not the United States. So I'm not sure they're as firework obsessed up there as we are down here. And if there was some sort of event nearby that offered both traditional fireworks and a drone show, I imagine Crystal would have been familiar with it, and possibly even attended it herself. So I guess we should at least ask the question, could it have been a combination of fireworks and drones? But of course, Crystal also floats the idea that it could have been some sort of transformer blowing up. Now I too wondered about that, so I did a little digging. Now typically when one of these things blows up, it's a quick zap and a bright blue flash. Nothing like what Crystal described in her call. But that's when a simple residential transformer blows out. What's it like when an entire substation burns up? Well, thanks to ABC National News, we sort of have an idea.
Overnight, the New York City sky lit up in a supernatural shade of blue.
Oh my God.
What is that? That looks gnarly.
Wait, look at the sky.
Well, that doesn't look good.
Sparking alarms citywide.
Oh my God.
And I heard a giant bang. I thought it was fireworks going off. It looked like it was daytime. You look in the sky and it was bright blue.
But what looked like a scene from an alien invasion movie turned out to be an explosion at a Queens power plant.
I'm not going near there.
The explosion and fire knocking out power in the area and wreaking havoc at LaGuardia Airport. Losing several runway lights and air traffic control running on emergency power.
Be advised, the approach lights are out of service at this time.
One of the busiest airports in the world temporarily shut down right in the middle of the holiday rush.
Okay, so that does sound an awful lot like what Crystal described. And you can see the footage of this event, which occurred about 5 years ago, in our show notes at monstersamonguspodcast.com and by clicking the show notes tab. So those are the thoughts that I have. But if it was just a blown transformer that Crystal saw that evening, I do wonder what caused it to explode like that. Well, believe it or not, I actually have a paranormal story that just might explain how that could happen. And Wyatt from Florida is about to tell you.
Hey Derek, this is Wyatt from Florida, and I have a story to submit. The story took place in North Carolina, about, I'd say, maybe an hour away from Charlotte, North Carolina, out in the country. I was driving home from one of my buddy's house. We decided to make a couple steaks, have a good time. But anyways, it was time for me to head home, and I decided to take the back roads back home. And I was coming around a curve, and there's like a transformer, an electrical transformer, you know what I'm talking about, on the side of the road. And beneath that transformer, there was this, it still gives me chills to talk about it, but there was this, like, being that was just skinny, like, look, crippled, basically. It kind of resembled a human. You could see its ribs. You could see its spine. You could see its ribs. And it was crunched over. It gave me such a fright. I have no clue what it was. It had pointed ears. I don't know exactly what it was, but all I knew was as fast as I could have got out of there, I was terrified that this thing, whatever it was going to chase me. And I was just wondering what it could have been. And I just wanted to hear what you would think it would be. But anyways, love the show. I love hearing everybody that calls in, helping me learn a little bit more about the paranormal activities, I guess you'd say. But anyways, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, sir. Well, there you have it. A little humanoid creature sitting under a transformer. You know, that could be what caused all the problems up in Canada for Crystal and her family. Maybe there are these little creatures scurrying around the continent, destroying transformers and substations, for reasons unknown. And maybe, just maybe, cases like Massachusetts' infamous Dover demon are in fact the same creature. They just haven't yet been caught in the act. You remember the Dover demon, don't you?
April 21st, 1977. An ordinary Thursday night.
It was about 10:30 at night, and 17-year-old Bill Bartlett was with friends coming back from a party that they'd been to. They were driving down Farm Street when Bill Bartlett saw something on the side of the road. What he saw was something that doesn't resemble any animal that anybody has ever seen before. It was climbing along a broken down stretch of stone wall. And as he looked at it, it turned to look at him. He was absolutely terrified. Its head was about the same size as its body. It was really huge. It had no visible mouth, no nose, no ears, but it had two huge eyes, glowing orange. They were round, and Bill said they looked just like glass marbles.
Now that's a clip from Monsters and Mysteries in America. And before you start thinking that I'm losing it again, the Dover Demon was reported in 1977, the same year that both New York City and nearby Boston experienced major blackouts that affected a majority of each city's infrastructure. Now, is that a coincidence, or is there something more to all of it? I'll let you make that decision, but if you ask me, I'd say it's certainly fun to imagine little gremlins are down there somewhere, like squirrels, chewing on our power lines. A huge thanks to Wyatt, Crystal, and all of tonight's callers, because that's going to do it for this evening. Now, Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Please leave the show a rate and review wherever that sort of thing is possible. And while you're at it, please leave our film, Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle, a nice little review as well. I know you can do that sort of thing over at Amazon. And since you're online, don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts. And we have a YouTube page over there as well. Don't forget, each and every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern, you can listen to Monsters Among Us on the UNX Network. Just visit unxnetwork.com to tune in. And finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Code.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Another big thanks for hanging out with us here this evening. I had a real good time. And speaking of good times, don't tell everyone about this, but after everyone leaves, a few of us are gonna keep the party going. Stick around until after the outro and the ad, if you want in. Otherwise, have yourself a great evening. Keep it spooky out there. And trust me on this, don't forget the sunscreen. Good night, everyone.
Arguing, prompting the driver to pull over. Don't test your luck this summer.
Oh hey, glad to see you could make it over here. I wasn't so sure that you were gonna stick around. Well listen, I have something really cool I want to share with you. Do you want to hear something weird?
Hey Derek, my name's Keith from Vancouver, BC. I'm calling in to let you know about a story where I was living in Cape Town, South Africa, and I was about 13 years old. This would have been sometime in the mid to late 90s. I was watching TV with my family, with my brother and my mom, and at a commercial break, they got up and went to the kitchen to go get a drink. And so at that point, I just continued to stay in the room watching TV, and that's when the TV, or I suspect a entity of sorts, spoke through the TV to me, and it used the closed captioning, and it said, "I am going to kill you." And then it flashed off, and there was nothing, and then it flashed back on again, and same thing, the closed captioning came on, and it said, "I'm going to kill you." And then it cut off just as my brother and my mom walked back into the room, and it didn't happen again, so I was the only one that was witness to this anomaly. Yeah, that's by far the most paranormal thing that's ever happened to me. I wish I could say I've seen more, but that's as far as it goes. Thanks. Keep doing what you're doing. Bye.
Thank you, Keith. I told you that it was weird. Now I had Delaney do some digging on this case, and she gave me all sorts of great haunted television stories for later use. But what she gave me that better matches Keith's strange experience is a story from Reddit, and it goes as follows. When I was about 15 years old, around 1998, I was up late one night by myself. Back then I had recently discovered closed captions on TVs, so I always had it turned on, just for like the heck of it, even though the volume was turned up too. It was probably around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching some kind of spooky-ish true informational show on TLC or Discovery Channel. But I think it was one of those shows that tell about the history of the pyramids and UFOs and all that. So the TV show went to commercial as usual, and I was still reading the closed caption and listening to what was on. Then, all of a sudden, during the commercial break, the TV screen just goes black. The TV was still on and working, but it's like the channel had some technical difficulty or something. So I'm just sitting there for several seconds waiting on something to come back on the screen, when I see on the black screen in closed captioning the question, "Do you believe in Satan?" The screen was still dark, and nothing else and no sound was coming from it, but it just had that question on it in closed captioning. It stayed like that for probably 30 or 40 seconds, and finally a regular commercial came back on. But even with the commercial on, the creepy question lingered on the screen until after the regular programming came back on. It was probably stuck on the screen for a minute or two while the TV show was back on. Now those words were never part of a real commercial or the TV show itself. It eventually went back to normal and started working correctly again. So like I said, it was not really a big deal, but it creeped me out. And then I wanted to know if anyone else has had any rogue captions using closed captioning. Well, there you go, Keith. Not exactly like your brief but unsettling experience, but not unlike it either. Now, if I had to guess, I would say that whoever is typing that closed captioning, likely some bored intern or PA, is slipping those messages in there for their own enjoyment. People with repetitive jobs, like podcast editing, tend to do little things like that to keep themselves motivated and interested. Easter eggs, we like to call them, for some reason. Maybe because you have to hunt for them. But the point here being that I bet a fistful of dollars a human created both of these sinister closed caption messages. But regardless of the cause, I can imagine it being quite unnerving to read these messages late at night. You see, folks, weirdness can be found anywhere. So thank you again, Keith, for sharing that story. And speaking of weirdness being everywhere, you should see the strangeness I have queued up for you in tonight's Beyond. To join us, just visit patreon.com and search for Monsters Among Us podcast. A $5 monthly pledge will get you access to several days worth of past bonus content, and a $1 pledge gets you all the free content completely ad-free. And test drive either of those options with our 7-day free trial. Just be sure to stick around for a month or two afterward if you really dig what you heard. After all, $5 a month is a cup of coffee to you, but to us it means we can continue to release content. Content like this story from Dale, down there in Florida.
Hey Derek, this is Dale. I called earlier with a story. My brother and I went to Ireland last year to research our roots and kind of find our roots. Our last name's Hayes, like yours, but we kind of had a general idea where our roots were from and our family and stuff like that. So we did a 2-week tour. We didn't go with a tour group or anything like that. We just kind of did our own thing. Went off the beaten path, and we stayed at a haunted castle, which was funny.